The neighborhood of Lakeside Grove looked like a perfect little postcard town in the American Midwest, a place with tree-lined streets, pastel-painted homes arranged in neat rows, and meticulously trimmed lawns. Each house seemed to adhere to a uniform style, blending seamlessly into an idealized version of suburban America. Residents prided themselves on friendly waves, dog-walking rituals at sunrise, and well-maintained flower beds. Anyone visiting might assume it was a blissfully tranquil community. Behind this polished facade, however, the Lakeside Grove Homeowners Association reigned supreme. The HOA had rules upon rules, on everything from mailbox style to permissible shades of exterior paint, from trash bin placement to hedge height. Most people found it manageable enough, taking comfort in the idea that these guidelines kept the neighborhood looking pristine. But in reality, it meant that those with an eye for control could enforce the bylaws with an iron fist. And that was exactly where Brenda Farnett, privately nicknamed Karen, came into the picture. Brenda Farnett was in her late 50s, with meticulously coiffed dark hair and a penchant for tailored blouses. She was a self-proclaimed guardian of Lakeside Grove's aesthetic standards. A middle-aged woman possessed of a fierce sense of self-righteousness, she delighted in patrolling the streets at odd hours, clipboard in hand, hunting for any violations that might threaten the uniform appearance. The neighbors mostly learned to keep their heads down to avoid her glare or petty notices. When the Maxwell family moved in, no one suspected it would spark one of Lakeside Grove's biggest controversies. John Maxwell was a software engineer who worked remotely. Dana Maxwell was a part-time accountant at a small firm downtown, and their 14-year-old son Eli used a wheelchair. A complication at birth had left him with limited mobility in his legs, but he was a bright, affable kid who rarely let challenges dampen his spirits. He loved tinkering with gadgets, reading science fiction, and daydreaming of building robotics that could help others. Dana and John chose Lakeside Grove because it offered wide sidewalks, a quiet environment, and a promise of safety. They'd heard rumors about a strict HOA but assumed as long as they kept a tidy property, they'd be fine. Soon after moving in, they realized that the front entrance to their house, which included a short flight of concrete steps, made it difficult for Eli to get in and out. The family decided to build a ramp, ensuring he could come and go freely. At first, the ramp seemed harmless enough, a gently sloping structure made of sturdy pressure-treated wood, anchored against the side of the porch. It wasn't an eyesore, it was painted in a subdued color matching the house's exterior. When the Maxwell family asked the HOA for permission, they found contradictory statements. Some members insisted it had to go through architectural review, while others, including the HOA president, felt it was obviously necessary for Eli's mobility. Only one voice opposed it outright, with increasing bitterness: Brenda Farnett. She insisted the ramp violated uniformity guidelines, that it was unapproved construction, that it disrupted the house's visual harmony, and that the Maxwells had skipped steps in the formal review process. In truth, the family had done their best to follow the rules, but the more Brenda pressed, the more complicated it became. Eli, oblivious to the brewing storm, reveled in his newfound freedom. No longer did his parents have to lift him over the steps. He could roll up and down the ramp, heading out for fresh air whenever he liked. He greeted neighbors with a wave, wearing a broad grin. Many residents found it endearing. He was a polite teen who clearly needed the ramp. Who would object? Brenda Farnett's glare from across the street, however, told a different story. She stepped onto her porch one morning, took one look at the ramp, and felt her blood boil. In her eyes, it was an unsightly structure that had no place in Lakeside Grove. The entire principle of unapproved additions rankled her, especially when she believed the neighborhood's sacred aesthetic uniformity was at stake. She marched back inside, determining that she would find a way to have that ramp removed, no matter how many forms or appeals the Maxwell family filed. Her fuse had been lit. It was only a matter of time before that ramp became the neighborhood's biggest source of conflict. Within the week, the Maxwell family started receiving formal letters in their mailbox. Printed on thick HOA stationery, these notices cited sections of the Lakeside Grove bylaws, references to common facade standards, unapproved exterior modifications, and potential liability hazards. Each letter threatened fines if the ramp wasn't removed or brought up to code. John Maxwell reread these letters with rising confusion. He'd already emailed the HOA board about the ramp, showing them the blueprint from a contractor friend who ensured it met ADA guidelines. The board's official response had been ambiguous. Some recognized the necessity, others said it needed a final sign-off. But none, except Brenda Farnett, had said it outright needed to be removed. So why the barrage of letters? When Dana telephoned the HOA to clarify, the receptionist said, "I'm not sure who's sending repeated citations, but Ms. Farnett is quite vocal about needing it resolved." No official meeting had been scheduled. Brenda seemed to be acting on her own, using her board membership to churn out notices. Eli caught on that something was wrong when he saw his parents' anxious expressions, the pile of official-looking envelopes on the kitchen counter. "Are we in trouble with the HOA or something?" he asked one night after dinner, rolling up to the table. John tried to reassure him, saying it was just red tape they'd sort out. But even he sounded uncertain. Behind the scenes, Brenda escalated her campaign. She cornered the board president, Carl Hicks, after a regular monthly meeting. "Carl," she said, voice clipped, "the Maxwell ramp is a blatant violation of our architectural harmony. It must be removed or redesigned." They never got formal approval. "I'm pushing for immediate fines." Carl, a more moderate presence, tried to reason with her. "Brenda, it's a ramp for a teenager in a wheelchair. Federal law typically requires reasonable accommodations. A ramp is hardly a frivolous addition." Brenda's eyes flashed. "It sets a precedent, Carl. Next we'll have random decks, extended fences, or brightly painted doors. I'm not heartless, but we have standards for a reason." He sighed. "I'll bring it up for a formal vote at the next board session. Let's handle it systematically." But systematically wasn't quick enough for Brenda. She wanted immediate action. Fueled by frustration, she typed up official-sounding letters threatening daily fines. She planted stories among certain board members that the ramp might cause property values to drop. She circulated a rumor that the wooden structure might be unsafe, lacking professional inspection, despite the Maxwell's contractor friend's input. In short, she sowed fear and mistrust among neighbors, hoping to rally them against the ramp. Meanwhile, life for the Maxwells grew stressful. They were new to Lakeside Grove, wanting to fit in, not create a ruckus. But ignoring the avalanche of threats was impossible. Even though no official board majority had condemned them, Brenda's constant harassment made them fear she might gather enough votes to force them to remove the ramp. Eli felt the tension most acutely. One afternoon, as he rolled down the ramp to meet a friend for a bike ride, he'd ride alongside them in his hand-cycle chair. He noticed Miss Farnett standing in her driveway, arms folded, eyes fixed on him. The withering look she gave him spoke volumes. "You are not welcome here with that ramp." He swallowed back a surge of anxiety, quickly turning away. How could an adult harbor such resentment toward a small accommodation? Dana began to wonder if they should compromise, perhaps paint the ramp a different color or reduce its width. But the contractor friend explained that the ramp's slope and railings were carefully measured to meet safety standards. They couldn't just slice off a foot or raise the slope. Doing so might make it dangerous for Eli. The family refused to endanger their son just to appease one hostile neighbor. Still, they dreaded a possible day when the HOA might forcibly remove the ramp. Unbeknownst to them, Brenda Farnett was already hatching a plan that would surpass mere letter writing. If Lakeside Grove's board wouldn't help her eradicate the eyesore, she'd find a more direct method. Sunlight spilled over Lakeside Grove one bright Saturday, the sky clear and blue. Neighbors bustled around, mowing lawns, washing cars, or playing catch with their kids. At the Maxwell home, Eli was finishing a robotics project on the living room table, absorbed in tinkering with tiny servos. John, noticing the gorgeous weather, suggested a family outing, maybe a trip to the park or local farmer's market. Eli eagerly agreed. While Dana grabbed their grocery list, John stepped onto the porch to check the morning mail. He paused, eyes narrowing. Something was off about the ramp. At its base, near the sidewalk, a large metal padlock secured the rails together, preventing the ramp's surface from folding down. Another lock sat at the top, chaining the ramp's handrails to the porch post. John stared, stunned. He tugged on one padlock, definitely not something he owned. Quickly, he called Dana outside. She, too, gaped at the contraption. The ramp was effectively sealed off, locked in place so no one could traverse it. They tested the gates, but the heavy padlocks and chain links would not budge. Realization hit them like a punch. Someone had come in the night and forcibly locked up the ramp to keep it from being used. Eli rolled up to the threshold inside, noticing his parents' alarm. "What's going on?" he asked. John turned to him, face tense. Someone's locked the ramp. We can't open it right now." Eli's stomach sank. "So I can't get out at all?" Desperate, John scoured the mailbox. Sure enough, an unsigned note read, "Ramp not HOA approved. Padlocks will stay until removal or compliance." There was no official letterhead or signature, but it reeked of Brenda Farnett's involvement. In a flurry, Dana tried calling the HOA's general number. It went to voicemail. No surprise, it was a Saturday. She left an urgent message, explaining the ramp was illegally locked. Meanwhile, John dialed the local police's non-emergency line, uncertain if this was a matter for law enforcement. The dispatcher said they could send an officer to check for trespassing or malicious tampering. As the Maxwells waited, a small crowd of curious neighbors gathered, alarmed by the sight of large chains and padlocks on a disabled teen's ramp. Some offered help, tugging on the locks or looking for ways to cut them. However, everyone worried about potential liability. Could they get in trouble for damaging property if they cut it off? Then, strolling down the sidewalk, came Brenda Farnett herself, carrying her ever-present folder. She feigned surprise, though her smug expression gave her away. "Oh dear, what's this?" she said, voice dripping with false concern. "Has your ramp been secured? Such a shame it had to come to this." Dana confronted her directly. "You did this, didn't you? You padlocked my son's wheelchair ramp." Brenda clutched her folder. "I have no idea who physically locked it, but I do know the ramp is out of compliance. Maybe someone took it upon themselves to enforce the rule." She gave a dramatic shrug. "If you want it unlocked, you'll need to speak with the board about meeting proper guidelines. Or remove it." Fury flared in John's eyes. "That's illegal. You can't just trap someone inside their house." He pointed toward the door, where Eli sat, looking stricken by the blockade. Other neighbors muttered in agreement, glaring at Brenda. Brenda's lips curled. "I simply stand for the rules. If the Maxwell family had sought proper architectural review, they wouldn't be in this predicament. We must maintain neighborhood standards, or we lose everything." With that, she pivoted on her heel and walked off, ignoring the outraged shouts behind her. Within the hour, a police cruiser arrived. 2 officers listened to the Maxwell's explanation. They took photos of the padlocks, acknowledging this was indeed a problematic act. However, the officer explained that if the ramp was on the Maxwell's property, it could be considered vandalism or trespassing, but he needed to confirm property boundaries. The ramp extended partly onto the city sidewalk, complicating jurisdiction. Ultimately, they said they'd file a report, but recommended the Maxwells pursue civil action or contact the HOA to have the locks removed. So the ramp remained locked that day. Eli, left indoors, grew upset at missing the family outing. The injustice stung. Simply because one neighbor objected, he was essentially barred from leaving his home. For John and Dana, it was a breaking point. They realized they couldn't rely on official channels to fix the problem swiftly. That night, as darkness fell, the locked ramp glinted ominously under the porch light. And in the Maxwell living room, the family held tense discussions with a small circle of sympathetic neighbors. If the HOA wouldn't fix this, and if direct confrontation with Brenda led nowhere, how else could they reclaim Eli's freedom? A spark of an idea formed, fueled by community solidarity, a workaround that no rule or padlock could thwart. In the Maxwell's living room, a half-dozen neighbors squeezed onto couches and chairs. Michael from next door, who was handy with tools. Lucinda, a retired engineer with a passion for community volunteer work. Darren, who had experience in construction, plus a couple of other friends who'd seen enough of Brenda Farnett's antics to want to help. John and Dana explained the situation, while Eli sat quietly in his wheelchair, trying to keep hope alive. "You can't just remain indoors forever," Michael said. "We have to remove those locks. But if we cut them, Ms. Farnett might put new ones, or escalate. She's obviously determined." Lucinda folded her arms. "We could petition the HOA or file an emergency injunction, but that might take weeks or months in court." She frowned. "Eli shouldn't be imprisoned in the meantime." Darren leaned forward. "Is it possible to build some alternative ramp that Ms. Farnett can't sabotage? Maybe something that doesn't count as a permanent structure? The HOA can't padlock a ramp that isn't there overnight, right?" A hush fell as the neighbors considered this angle. Dana's eyes lit with realization. A detachable ramp? Or a portable system we set up each morning for Eli and remove each evening. Then there's nothing to padlock or declare non-compliant. It'd be an annoyance to set up daily, but better than nothing. John nodded vigorously. Yes, something like a modular wooden bridge that sits over the steps, locked in place from inside the house, so it can't just be undone by a neighbor. He glanced at Darren. Think we can do that? Darren rubbed his chin. We need to measure precisely. A single span might be heavy, but we can design segments that latch together. Maybe pin them in place so it's stable for Eli's wheelchair to roll on. At night, store them in your garage. Ms. Farnett can't object to a structure that doesn't exist when she's snooping. Lucinda grinned. That's sneaky, but brilliant. If the board complains, we can argue it's just a temporary walkway, not an official ramp. No permanent modifications. Michael chimed in. I have spare lumber in my shed. Could gather more from a hardware store. We can do a build session tomorrow. If we all pitch in, we might finish quickly. Eli finally spoke, his voice subdued with gratitude. That would be incredible. I thank you so much. He paused, swallowing hard. I just hate feeling trapped, you know? This ramp was my freedom. Dana placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get you a new path. One no one can lock. They hammered out details. The plan. The group would convene the following morning at dawn, gather in the Maxwell's backyard or in Darren's workshop, measure the porch steps precisely, build a modular wooden structure with gentle slope segments, a stable surface, and railings. It would fit flush against the porch so Eli could roll down safely. Then, each evening, they'd disassemble it, store it in the garage. The official ramp with padlocks would remain, for now, unused. The neighbors recognized the comedic irony. The padlocked ramp would become irrelevant once the new bridge was in place each day. They parted that night with excitement tempered by the knowledge that they were effectively circumventing the HOA. If Brenda discovered the plan, she might try more extreme measures. But the moral imperative was clear. A teenage boy deserved to leave his house. If that meant outsmarting a vindictive board member, so be it. As the group dispersed under the cover of darkness, a sense of quiet unity pervaded. They were about to defy the petty tyranny of Karen Farnett not through open confrontation, but by outsmarting her. And in Lakeside Grove, that brand of neighborly cooperation carried a certain poetic justice. Sunday morning came with the sun barely peeking over the rooftops. By 6:30, the Maxwell backyard was alive with subdued activity. Darren arrived first, hauling a small trailer of lumber, 2x4s, plywood sheets, and pre-cut lengths for forming the ramp's frame. Lucinda carried a large roll of technical drafting paper, wanting to finalize the modular design carefully. Within an hour, about half a dozen neighbors had gathered. Michael had a portable table saw, while Aria, a younger neighbor with carpentry experience, set out boxes of nails, screws, and brackets. John Maxwell took quick measurements of the porch steps from inside, ensuring no one would see them from the front yard. The last thing they wanted was Brenda Farnett prowling by. Dana brewed coffee in the kitchen, distributing cups to the volunteer crew. Meanwhile, Eli watched from the back doorway, fascinated by the flurry of preparation. He was still stuck indoors since the official ramp was padlocked, but the backyard door offered a small stoop, unfortunately with steps as well. Still, seeing neighbors rally for him filled him with gratitude. Lucinda spread out her drafting paper on a makeshift workbench. We need each segment to be manageable in weight. Maybe 4-foot lengths that latch together, she said. We'll use angle brackets to lock them in place so they don't shift under the wheelchair's weight. Also, we need a gentle slope, so let's keep it about 1 inch of rise for every foot of run. Darren nodded, marking lengths on the lumber. If the porch steps are 3 steps high, about 20 inches total height, we'll do at least 20 feet of ramp length in segments. That's a 1/12 slope, well within normal guidelines. We can add 2 segments for a short landing in the middle. Michael tested the chop saw, ensuring it was safe and accurate. We'll need rails on the sides, right? If Brenda complains about aesthetics, we can paint it a neutral color. But it's not meant to be permanent, so maybe just seal the wood quickly. Aria patted the plywood. I can handle cutting the deck surface. Then we can attach non-slip strips to keep it from being slick in wet weather. We have to consider every detail to keep Eli safe. Careful not to be too noisy. It was still early, and they wanted to avoid alerting neighbors who might side with Brenda. They set about cutting and assembling. Sawdust floated in the golden morning light. The rhythmic hum of power tools hummed. Every so often, the group paused to confirm angles or measure the slant. There was an air of hushed excitement, a sense that they were engaged in a clandestine mission for a noble cause. Inside, Eli occasionally rolled up to the back window to see the progress. The sight of a half-built ramp, albeit in sections, reminded him of a puzzle coming together. "This is so cool," he said quietly to his mom. "I've never seen neighbors unite like this for something so personal." Dana squeezed his hand. "It's because they care, honey. They know what's right. Brenda Farnett isn't the only voice in this neighborhood." She swallowed, blinking back tears of gratitude. People still look out for each other. By mid-morning, the skeleton of the modular structure was complete. 8 segments, each about 4 feet wide, 4 feet long, with a slight slope. They'd join end to end with hinged brackets, forming a stable track. Next came the side railings, simple, sturdy boards about 4 inches high to prevent wheel slip. For extra security, they planned a small lip at the edge to ensure the wheels wouldn't roll off. Everyone took turns with sanding edges, smoothing potential splinters. After lunch, Arya and Darren tested the alignment in the backyard. They laid the segments on a slight slope of ground, locked them together, and walked up and down. It held their weight. They pressed on it from side to side, no wobble. Encouraged, they loaded the segments onto a dolly, ready to move them around the front of the house for a final test. But they had to be cautious. Brenda might see them, so they decided to wait until twilight. Under cover of dim light, they'd assemble the detachable ramp across the Maxwell porch steps. If it worked, Eli could roll down. Then they'd break it down again before bedtime, storing it in the garage. The next morning, they'd reassemble it, allowing him egress for the day. The plan felt cunning. The official padlocked ramp might remain, inert and useless, overshadowed by this stealthy new structure that vanished when not in use. The idea of outsmarting Brenda Farnett and letting a disabled teen move freely spurred everyone on. As the afternoon sun grew hot, the neighbors took a well-earned break, sipping lemonade in the Maxwell yard. They gazed at the neatly stacked ramp segments, a testament to collaboration. John clasped Darren's hand. "We can't thank you enough. This is a gift beyond measure." Darren just grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "We help our own. That's how it should be." No one could deny the quiet thrill of defying Brenda Farnett's tyranny. Tonight, they'd see if the new ramp truly functioned as hoped. If it did, there'd be no more padlocks restricting Eli's independence. Only a daily routine of setting up and removing a ramp that the HOA couldn't ban because it simply didn't exist permanently. Twilight descended on Lakeside Grove, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Porch lights flickered on, and the neighborhood sank into a calm hush. At the Maxwell house, tension rose once more. Everyone was on standby, waiting for full darkness to cloak their operation. They didn't want to cause suspicion or alert Brenda Farnett. Around 9 p.m., the volunteer crew reassembled in the Maxwell garage. They quietly retrieved the modular ramp segments they'd constructed in the backyard. John, Darren, Michael, and Arya each took a piece, stepping lightly around the side of the house toward the front steps. Lucinda stood by with a flashlight, shielding the beam so it wouldn't draw attention from across the street. Dana and Eli watched from the living room window, hearts pounding. The porch light was off to keep the area dim. The official padlocked ramp still loomed to the side, untouched. Soon, John signaled for Dana to open the front door from inside. She did so, casting minimal light onto the porch. Methodically, the neighbors laid the first segment at the bottom step, ensuring it rested flush against the sidewalk. The second segment locked onto it with hinge brackets, forming a continuous slope up the next rise. They repeated the process, climbing each step with the segments until the final piece reached the threshold of the porch. For each joint, they snapped a sturdy pin or latch so the sections wouldn't shift. The entire structure took up some space on the walkway, but it was less imposing than the original ramp. No permanent posts were hammered into the ground. After about 15 minutes of whispered adjustments, the structure was complete, a wooden path bridging from the sidewalk to the porch. Darren signaled to Dana. "Go ahead, have Eli try it from inside." Carefully, Dana opened the front door wide, revealing the newly formed wooden slope. Eli, adrenaline surging, rolled his wheelchair forward. His dad guided him to the top of the new ramp. We tested it out in the backyard, but let's be cautious, John murmured. Eli nodded, heart racing. This is it. He eased onto the slope. The surface felt stable. Each segment gave a little, but held firm under his weight. The shallow angle was manageable, and the side rails offered enough security to prevent drifting. Step by step, or rather segment by segment, Eli descended, the hush of the night broken only by the faint hum of cicadas. At last, he reached the bottom, rolling onto the sidewalk. A quiet cheer rose from the neighbors. Eli let out a relieved laugh, tears stinging his eyes. I'm free again. He turned around, testing the ramp upward. The gentle slope was no harder to climb than the old official ramp, maybe even smoother in spots. Arya gave a thumbs up. Looks good. Should we fix any squeaks or movement? She crouched at the seams, verifying no major gaps. Darren hammered a small wedge into one corner for added stability. That's it, he whispered. Dana, stepping onto the porch, could barely contain her grin. It's incredible. Thank you all so much. She glanced warily at Brenda Farnett's house across the street. The windows seemed dark, though the faint glow of a living room lamp was visible. Possibly, Brenda had no clue what was happening. After letting Eli make a few practice runs, they decided to finalize the plan. The ramp would remain in place for the next hour or so, letting the family confirm it was stable. Then they'd disassemble it and store it in the garage overnight. Tomorrow morning, John would reassemble it for Eli's daily use, thus thwarting any attempt by Brenda to sabotage or padlock it. The official, locked ramp on the side porch would remain a moot point. Satisfied, the group parted ways under the cover of darkness. They promised to keep the arrangement discreet. The entire event felt exhilarating. Neighbors banding together to solve a cruel act, building a workaround that was part cunning and part empathy. If Brenda discovered it, they'd cross that bridge later, no pun intended. Eli rolled back into the house, brimming with excitement. I can come and go as I please, he said softly, voice trembling with relief. John ruffled his hair. Yes, son. We'll keep this up as long as we must. They all hoped, though, that the HOA might eventually see reason and remove the padlocks from the old ramp. But until then, they had their solution. That night, after disassembling the modular ramp around 11 p.m. and storing it safely, the Maxwell family slept easier than they had in weeks. They'd found a path forward, literally. And while the threat of Brenda Farnett still loomed, they at least had wrested back some control. Freed from the tyranny of a locked ramp, Eli's sense of independence was restored, courtesy of loyal neighbors who believed in doing what was right, no matter the rules. The next morning, a soft glow of sunrise touched Lakeside Grove. The Maxwell family rose early, keen to see if their plan would work in broad daylight. By 7 a.m., John stepped into the garage, retrieving each ramp segment. One by one, he carried them around to the front porch, reassembling the structure. Dana assisted, ensuring the pieces fit snugly. Within minutes, the makeshift wooden bridge took shape, spanning the steps once again. Eli, who typically woke at that hour to prepare for school, attending a local high school that offered partial remote classes, rolled to the front door. The newly assembled ramp awaited him. He exhaled in relief, heading outside to enjoy the crisp morning air. He tested the slope, noticing it felt as secure as the previous night. The day was bright, and birds chirped in the neatly trimmed oak trees. Moments later, a neighbor walking her dog strolled by, noticing the ramp. She waved cheerfully. Morning, Eli. That's a neat walkway. Did your dad build that? She had no idea about the drama with the official padlocked ramp. Eli nodded. A bunch of neighbors helped. It's not permanent, so no trouble, he added with a hint of mischief. The neighbor gave a quizzical smile, but moved on. Soon, Michael arrived on his way to work, noticing the final result. Looks great, he commented in a low voice. Let's hope Miss Farnett doesn't blow a fuse. Alas, the uneasy peace lasted until about 8:30 a.m., when Brenda Farnett emerged onto her porch. She glanced across the street at the Maxwell home. At first, she saw the old ramp, still locked. Then her gaze shifted to the newly assembled structure bridging the steps. She squinted. What on earth is that? She grabbed her phone, presumably taking photos from her vantage point. After a minute, she marched across the street, approaching the Maxwell's yard. Dana, on the porch, tried to keep a neutral face. Brenda's mouth twisted. "What is this contraption?" she demanded. "Another ramp? You can't just erect new structures without approval." Dana maintained composure. "It's not permanent. We set it up daily. There's no bylaw forbidding a temporary walkway on private steps." She gestured to the simple wooden frame. "We store it every night in the garage, so it's not an exterior modification." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She walked around the side, taking pictures from all angles. "This is a blatant attempt to circumvent HOA rules. I'll be lodging a formal complaint." A flicker of anger rose in Dana. "You padlocked our original ramp, leaving my son trapped. We found a safe alternative. There's nothing in the bylaws that disallows a removable wooden walkway for personal use. Are you planning to lock this one too, every time it appears?" Brenda stiffened, refusing to answer directly. "I'll talk to the board. This is far from over." With that, she pivoted on her heel and stomped away, fuming. Eli peeked out from behind the door. "She hates it, right?" Dana forced a wry smile. "Undoubtedly. But let her complain. We'll see if the HOA can ban something that vanishes every night." The day progressed with the usual routine. Eli used the new ramp to leave for a short trip downtown with his dad, picking up supplies for a school project. They returned in the afternoon, ascended the ramp easily. The daily tasks became simpler, unhampered by locked rails. Some neighbors noticed the contraption, asked questions, and learned about the cunning solution. By evening, Brenda's influence made itself known in the form of another letter, a notice of potential violation referencing unapproved daily installations. But it was vague, lacking any real teeth. The Maxwell family read it, sighed, and tossed it in a drawer. They repeated their new ritual. After sundown, they disassembled the walkway, stored it inside. Next morning, they'd reinstall it. No rule was broken because no permanent structure remained. This pattern repeated across the week. Each day, the modular ramp appeared for Eli's use. Each night it vanished. Brenda tried capturing photos, but the Maxwell porch was bare after dark. If she complained about storing it in the garage, she had no legal basis. Residents could store personal items inside. Neighbors quietly applauded the ingenuity, praising the Maxwell family's perseverance. Still, behind the scenes, tension simmered. Brenda Farnett was not one to accept defeat. She rummaged through Lakeside Grove bylaws, seeking any loophole to ban temporary walkways. But the entire code had been written with permanent structures in mind, not daily assemblies. She tried rallying the board, claiming it was a visual nuisance, but even sympathetic members hesitated. Punishing a disabled teen was a PR nightmare. Brenda's frustration grew, intensifying her vendetta. Meanwhile, Eli's daily life regained normalcy. Freed from the oppressive padlocks, he took great joy in small things. Heading to the library, visiting a friend's house for study sessions, or simply wheeling outside to watch the sunset. Each time he rolled down or up the modular ramp, it felt like an act of defiance against a petty cruelty. The entire neighborhood seemed to sense that a tipping point was near. Would the board back Brenda and find some obscure rule to shut the bridge down? Or would the public outcry defend the Maxwells' right to a daily, removable ramp? The answer hung in the air, uncertain, as Lakeside Grove balanced precariously between petty authoritarianism and neighborly empathy. A special HOA meeting was called for the end of that week, fueling rumors that Brenda Farnett had demanded official action on the Maxwell's ramp situation, both the original padlocked one and the new, detachable structure. Flyers and mailboxes read, "Emergency session to address ongoing architectural concerns." Everyone knew it was code for Karen versus Maxwell ramp. Dana and John decided to attend, wanting to defend their stance. They also invited a few supportive neighbors, including Darren and Lucinda. Eli considered going, but found the typical HOA meeting room cramped and stressful. Besides, it might be heated, and he disliked confrontations. He asked them to record it or at least recap the details. That Thursday evening, the small community clubhouse bustled with residents curious about the drama. People took seats in folding chairs, facing a long table where the HOA board sat. President Carl Hicks at the center, flanked by 4 members, among them the infamous Brenda Farnett. She wore a sharp blazer, a stack of folders at her elbow, and a self-satisfied air. Carl kicked off the meeting with mundane updates, lawn care contracts, upcoming holiday decorations guidelines, etc. Then he cleared his throat, face turning serious. Next agenda item, the Maxwell family's wheelchair ramps. We'll hear statements, then the board will deliberate. Brenda wasted no time, flipping open her folders. Fellow residents, she began, voice carrying a theatrical edge. We face a grave challenge to Lakeside Grove's uniform standards. The Maxwells first built an unapproved, unsightly ramp on the side porch, ignoring proper procedure. Then, after it was secured due to safety concerns, she paused, ignoring the outraged murmur from the audience. They introduced a daily walkway that's equally non-compliant. This sets a dangerous precedent if we allow random additions to our facades. We must uphold the rules. Dana rose to speak, anger simmering under her calm exterior. My family made every attempt to follow guidelines. We consulted with a contractor, emailed the board, and tried to find a safe solution for our disabled son. Ms. Farnett padlocked the original ramp, blocking our child's only means of leaving the house. We built a temporary walkway, which we remove at night. That's not a permanent structure or random addition. We are simply ensuring my son's basic mobility. John stood beside her, arms crossed. We have no intention of violating aesthetics. The original ramp was painted to match the house. The new walkway is discreet. We're not storing anything in the yard. Ms. Farnett's actions were extreme and unjustified. Brenda snorted. Yes. Well, you overlooked formal architectural approval. That's the bottom line. If we let this pass, next we'll have neighbors erecting tiki huts or carports without oversight. She brandished some photos of the modular ramp. Look at this mismatched wood, these rails, hardly in line with Lakeside Grove's curated appearance. Darren from the audience stood, voice firm. This is about a disabled teen's freedom, not about garden ornaments. If the main ramp had been left unpadlocked, none of this would be necessary. The formal procedure Ms. Farnett keeps citing is just a smokescreen for her personal vendetta. A wave of quiet applause rippled through the spectators. Brenda's face pinched, but she forged on. She tried citing random bylaw clauses about exterior modifications, but none specifically banned daily, removable structures. The board members flipped through their rulebooks with uncertain frowns. Indeed, the code never considered a scenario like this. President Carl Hicks addressed Brenda carefully. Even if the original ramp lacked final sign-off, physically preventing a homeowner from using it, especially for a legitimate mobility need, exceeds the scope of HOA authority. The padlocks must be removed. We risk potential legal action from the Americans with Disabilities Act if we continue to hamper the Maxwell's access. Brenda bristled. That ramp was never verified safe or aesthetically consistent. I stand by the need for compliance. She glared at the board. Surely you see that letting them circumvent the rules invites chaos? Another board member, Marisol, spoke up. But the new walkway is not permanent, so it may not fall under our standard review. Frankly, if we try to enforce a ban on a daily, removable ramp, we might appear discriminatory. This is a liability we can't shoulder. She eyed Brenda pointedly. The tension thickened. Brenda realized she was losing. The public mood favored the Maxwells. The board seemed unwilling to forcibly remove a wheelchair ramp. Sensing retreat, she tried one last gambit. Then let's impose a stricter policy requiring that all external additions, even temporary, pass inspection. That would corner them. But Carl sighed. We can't pass a new rule that's obviously targeting a disabled teen's solution. It'd be immoral and likely illegal. The official motion from me is that we require the Maxwell family to submit a safety certification from a licensed contractor for their daily walkway. Once provided, we let them continue using it. As for the original ramp with padlocks, the HOA must remove them promptly. A hush fell. No one seconded Brenda's demands. The board took a quick vote. By a 4-1 margin, they agreed with Carl's approach. A wave of quiet clapping swept the room. Brenda sat rigid, lips pressed in fury. She couldn't block this outcome. The meeting adjourned soon after, neighbors dispersing with relieved chatter. Outside, a cluster of supporters gathered around the Maxwells, congratulating them. Dana gave a tearful smile. We'll provide any certification needed. Thank you all. John shook hands with neighbors who had spoken up, grateful for the broad support. In the parking lot, Brenda Farnett marched to her car, seething. She'd lost the official battle. Yet a flicker of vengeance lingered. If the HOA forced the removal of her padlocks, so be it. But in her mind, the Maxwell ramp remained an abomination. She still believed that letting it stand, temporary or otherwise, invited anarchy. Yet with the board's decision final, her official leverage was gone. Still, she might have one more arrow in her quiver beyond official channels. In that moment, Brenda promised herself she would never accept defeat, not while that eyesore ramp marred Lakeside Grove. Little did she know, the neighborhood's stance had grown so resolute that even her final outbursts would be powerless. A few days after the HOA meeting, a maintenance worker showed up at the Maxwell house under official board orders. With a pair of heavy-duty cutters, he removed the padlocks from the old ramp's rails, unwinding the chain that had pinned it shut. Eli watched from the porch, a swirl of emotions in his chest, relief that the ramp was no longer sealed, but also resentment at how long it had taken. Dana thanked the worker, asking if the ramp was now fully allowed. He shrugged. The board says the final sign-off is pending some compliance forms, but it should be functional. Ms. Farnett may not like it, but they want to avoid legal trouble. He gave an apologetic half-smile. Hope this helps. Eli tested the old ramp, rolling down carefully. It felt slightly stiff from disuse, but still sturdy. By all measures, it was an ADA-compliant slope, painted to match the house. The fact that it was ever locked at all seemed absurd. John took photos of the ramp, just in case they needed evidence in some future dispute. Nevertheless, the Maxwells decided to keep using the new modular walkway for day-to-day tasks. The official ramp's surfaces might remain a target if Brenda found a new tactic. The daily wooden bridge had become a symbol of community solidarity. Besides, the modular design had certain benefits. They could easily tweak or replace pieces, and it gave them peace of mind that no one could sabotage or chain it overnight, because it wouldn't be there. Brenda Farnett fumed. She watched from her window as the maintenance worker cut away her beloved padlocks, discarding them like trash. Her effort to keep the ramp sealed had collapsed under the HOA board's official stance. She penned furious letters to Carl Hicks, accusing him of destroying Lakeside Grove's uniformity. She threatened to resign from the board if they wouldn't uphold basic standards. The board, likely fed up with her antics, offered no sympathy. Among the neighbors, the saga had become the talk of the block. Some found humor in how a petty attempt to hamper a disabled teen's ramp had triggered the creation of a better solution. The daily walkway, quick to appear in the morning, quick to vanish at night, became almost legendary, a hush-hush act of defiance that everyone supported. People would ask the Maxwells if they needed extra help or supplies, or if they wanted to refine the design further. A sense of camaraderie flourished. For Eli, it was a time of healing. While the padlock incident had rattled him, he felt buoyed by the community's unwavering support. In a school essay, he wrote about how adversity sometimes reveals the best in people. He recounted how neighbors banded together to build the modular ramp overnight, surprising him with a tangible demonstration of friendship. His teacher praised the piece, calling it a testament to resilience. That sense of triumphant relief, however, was tempered by an awareness that Brenda Farnett still lurked across the street, her hostility unabated. She had toned down public appearances, but privately seethed. The Maxwell family tried to ignore her steely glares. They had the ramps they needed, both official and temporary, and the HOA's grudging acceptance. Maybe that was enough. One late afternoon, as Eli returned from school, he noticed a new sign on Brenda's lawn. Protect our neighborhood standards. It seemed like a personal protest. He rolled his eyes, continuing on. The sign carried no real threat, just indicated that she refused to let the matter rest in her mind. Yet the bigger threat had dissolved. With the board's official stance, Brenda's direct sabotage was no longer tolerated. If she tried anything else, cutting the ramp or re-padlocking it, she'd face immediate repercussions. The new daily walkway, by its very nature, eluded her meddling. She could protest all she wanted, but short of brazen criminality, she couldn't trap Eli in his house again. And so, Lakeside Grove settled into a new normal. The Maxwell house sporting two ramps, one newly freed from locks, the other a cunning daily assembly that Brenda's pettiness had spawned. Tensions might flare occasionally, but the victory for accessibility stood firm. No matter how much Karen Farnett fumed, she couldn't override the moral imperative of letting a disabled teen live freely. As the months passed, Lakeside Grove's attention drifted to other matters. Seasonal festivals, community yard sales, holiday decorations. Life moved on. The Maxwells continued their routine of setting up the modular walkway each morning, removing it at night, though they also used the official ramp once its padlocks were gone. Despite everything, that second ramp often served as a backup or convenience for certain times of day. The family simply felt more secure knowing if anything happened to the old ramp, they still had their modular system. Eli thrived. He joined a robotics club at school, forging friendships beyond the neighborhood. Sometimes he'd invite classmates over, surprising them with the story of how one neighbor tried to lock his ramp, only for the entire community to fight back with a stealthy alternative. The incident became a local legend among the kids, illustrating how a Karen got outsmarted. Brenda Farnett receded from the public spotlight, though she remained in Lakeside Grove. Rumor had it she threatened to resign from the HOA board multiple times, but never followed through. Her credibility had been badly damaged by her extreme actions. People found it difficult to take her new complaints seriously. Her meltdown over the ramp overshadowed her entire record. If she wrote petty citations about someone's fence color, neighbors just rolled their eyes. The board, under Carl Hicks's leadership, shifted to a more balanced approach, reviewing each complaint fairly instead of deferring to Brenda's whims. One bright morning in spring, the Maxwell family decided to remove the big wooden walkway for good, no longer needing daily assembly, because the official ramp had finally been recognized as fully compliant. The board signed off on all forms. The padlocks were a memory of a dark chapter. The family chose to keep the modular segments stored in the garage, partly as a backup, partly as a memento of neighborly solidarity. They joked that if any new families needed a quick ramp, they'd be prepared to help. Darren, Lucinda, Aria, Michael, and the rest of the volunteer crew visited the Maxwells that weekend, recalling how they built the walkway under moonlight. Over a casual barbecue in the Maxwell backyard, they shared laughs about sneaking around to avoid Brenda's prying eyes. The atmosphere felt warm, a testament to the unbreakable bond formed during the crisis. Dana raised a toast to the best neighbors a family could ask for, and to outsmarting a bully with compassion. A round of cheers and clinking glasses followed. Eli, listening from the side, felt a swell of pride. The ramp fiasco had tested his spirit, but it also unveiled a deeper truth. Kindness and cooperation could triumph over cruelty. The petty tyranny of one person had unleashed a wave of empathy that no bylaws could suppress. In the weeks after, a shift in Lakeside Grove's culture became evident. People grew more outspoken against arbitrary rule enforcement. The HOA board introduced new guidelines emphasizing reasonable accommodation for special needs. Brenda tried to protest, but she had lost her persuasive edge. The final version passed overwhelmingly. Lakeside Grove might still value neat lawns and uniform paint, but never again at the cost of basic human dignity. As for Eli, each time he rolled down the official ramp, now free of chains, he felt a surge of gratitude for those who refused to let him be locked indoors. He remembered the day he discovered the padlocks, the sense of shock and entrapment. Then he recalled the triumphant feeling of using the detachable walkway for the first time, the hush of nighttime conspirators assembling it piece by piece. The story would stay with him forever, shaping his belief in community and resilience. Time marched on, yet the memory of Karen's padlocks and the midnight ramp build became part of Lakeside Grove folklore. Whenever new neighbors arrived, hearing the tale, they marveled at how a single malicious act had ignited such unity. Some might have expected negativity or bitterness to linger, but the outcome was decidedly hopeful. A neighborhood that rallied to protect a teen's freedom, overshadowing the rancor of one tyrannical board member. And so, in that quiet suburb, life continued. The wide sidewalks, well-trimmed lawns, and pastel homes remained, but with a new layer of meaning. People realized that neat appearances alone didn't define a community. Kindness, compassion, and the willingness to stand up for each other truly did. And in the Maxwell household, the legacy of that victory echoed each time Eli wheeled through his front door unimpeded, a simple act that, once threatened, had been fiercely reclaimed by good neighbors uniting against cruelty.